Well, welcome everybody, our viewers, to this webinar sponsored by the Active Archive Alliance, entitled Balancing Capacity, Performance, TCO, and Sustainability in an Active Archive World. That's a mouthful. My name is Rich Gadomski. I'm the tape evangelist for Fujifilm Recording Media. I'm also the co-chairman of the Active Archive Alliance, along with Betsy Doty of Spectralogic, who's my better half for sure. And just by introduction to what the Active Archive Alliance is, on the next slide, you'll see that we were founded in April of 2010. Our mission is to be collaborative education, promoting simplified online access to data throughout its life cycle in an active archive environment. Our members and sponsors seek to align education and technologies to meet evolving requirements for data archive. Our tagline is modern strategies to solve data growth challenges. And our members consist of the companies represented on this slide. We also have two more that are joining very shortly, and that is Architecta and Swiss Vault. But today we have representatives from Fujifilm, from Nyriad, from Folio Photonics, and from IBM. Thanks a lot for joining us. And I'd like to now introduce our moderator for today's session, and that is Tom Coughlin. We're very honored to have Tom here today. Tom has worked over 40 years in digital storage as an engineering manager, and a senior executive. His company creates reports on digital storage applications and provides industry consulting services. Tom has also founded several storage industry trade shows, including Flash Memory Summit. He's written over 500 articles, reports, and other publications. He writes for Forbes.com. He's also president-elect of IEEE. So again, very honored to have Tom with us today. Welcome, Tom Coughlin.
Thank you very much, Rich. So I'm going to be joined today by Adam Roberts, field CTO and product manager at Nyriad. Then Rich, of course, who's head of tape evangelism at Fujifilm. Travis Johnson, director of market strategies for Folio Photonics. And finally, Sean Brume, IBM tape evangelist and strategist. And let's get started on the next slide. So long-term data that's retained for a long period of time, that's called archiving. Data in an archive is not accessed as frequently as newer data. It's older data. It can still be valuable, but it's not used all the time. So data in those kind of archives can be in a more readily accessible storage system. And if so, then we call that an active archive. If it's in a system where the data or the storage media may be sitting on shelves, it takes a while to get to it, that's called cold storage. Now, active archives, in order to be the most effective, should also incorporate appropriate software intelligence layers to help them to do their job. Next slide. So we've got some figures here that are from an annual survey that I do on media and entertainment professionals and their use of storage, and also report the 2022 report on digital storage and media and entertainment, which we do. Now, active archives can store their data on local hard disk drives, magnetic tape, or optical storage, or in the cloud. And when we say cloud storage, that's managed storage that uses storage systems that can incorporate oftentimes solid-state drives, hard disk drives, magnetic tape, or optical storage. Now, this pie chart here shows archiving media choices from this professional media and entertainment survey that Coughlin Associates does annually. Next slide. And the data is archived roughly about after 90 to 120 days. That's when it becomes, gets that stage where it's not used as much. And probably over 80% of the world's data is in archives. We generate more of this all the time. That percentage is liable to grow. And with projections for data storage growth, the amount of data in archives estimate it's going to grow by something like 25 to 35% annually. And the chart on the right are for the media and entertainment archive storage. And if you look at the lower right-hand side, well, the upper side shows local storage versus cloud storage for archiving. The bottom slide shows the increasing percentage of the data that's in an archive that is actively accessed versus offline or cold storage. And with that, let's go to the next slide where Adam Roberts is going to talk about performance in active archives. Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you, Tom. So this is absolutely true. We'll talk a little about performance and active archive and some design considerations and how to make the most efficient solution for active archive. So next slide, please. So stored data is increasing at a 27% CAGR, reaching 11.1 zettabytes by 2025. There are some other estimates claiming even higher growth. So of this 11 zettabytes of data, 20% of it has been earmarked as likely to be accessed again, once, twice, multiple times. So this comes to 2.2 zettabytes of data. So we're going to consider this 2.2 zettabytes the warm tier that we're going to discuss here today inside of Active Archive. So inside of a warm tier, you want to be able to access this data in real time. It's not something you want to have packed away in cold storage. It's not something you'd want in a front-end expensive cache, but it's substantial. It's large, takes up a lot of space, and it consumes a big piece of the infrastructure. So it must be performant, but in a cost-efficient way. And the next chart, we'll talk a little about that. So when you look at what's falling between hot and cold, you know, at the front end, we've got SSDs, we have small capacity HDDs. This can provide a front-end hot data cache. Well, for colder data, bulk data, we have tape devices. And in the middle, you have this warm tier, which will be handled with large capacity HDDs in the most performant, efficient solutions that we can build. Now, to give you an idea, just to illustrate the size and scale of this, if you look at 2.2 zettabytes that I'm referring to as a warm tier, you would need 120 million plus 18 terabyte hard drives to reach this capacity. 18 terabyte drives are really large, and you still need 120 million plus to cover this space, just to give an illustration of where we're going and what we have to deal with as we lay out the solution, and knowing that we're growing year to year. On the next slide, we'll talk a little about how this looks in the data center. So large capacity HDDs, we want to utilize them because they're a lower cost per terabyte. A 12 and an 18 terabyte drive, as we know, will simply cost less than a 4 terabyte drive per terabyte. To utilize the best features, so to speak, of a hard drive, we want to utilize streaming. Utilizing streaming, we want to do intelligent data placement inside the warm tier. We take advantage of streaming I/O that allows us to use larger capacity HDDs, which allow us to get a lower cost per terabyte in this space where they're really needed to get this performance. So compact designs with really dense terabyte per 1U type specification. That's what we're looking for. Now, you also need intelligent data placement software at the block file and object level inside of Active Archive itself. What you want to make certain you do is that cold data doesn't end up on a hot SSD cache or a warm tier. You don't want hot data ending up in a tape library. You want to make certain you've balanced. So you've got two layers going on here: intelligent data placement inside the warm tier to enable large capacity drives, and you want intelligent data placement at the overall arching of the umbrella of the solution for the tape libraries and the SSD cache. So next slide, please. So efficient performance, it really requires a thoughtful design. To achieve these large capacity HDDs, you need intelligent data placement inside of the warm tier. You also want to utilize parallel stripes across as many drives as you possibly can. Utilizing a large stripe is kind of similar to a parallel file system where you're utilizing parallel access to a bunch of servers. But in this case, you want to utilize as many drives as possible. And you'll typically do this with an erasure code stripe. Erasure code stripe allows the redundancy to be global as opposed to localized in individual arrays. It allows you to get away from stranded capacity that shows up inside these drives. And last but not least, you want to build a solution that's dense. For some of the things you're going to hear later in this talk are going to be tied to TCO, smaller carbon footprint, and to put it simply, 5 4 terabyte drives can give you 20 terabytes, but a single helium-filled 20 terabyte drive can give you the same thing at a much smaller footprint. And to utilize that, you need such things as erasure codes, and large parallel stripes as you build these out. And thank you, Tom.
Well, you're welcome. Now, let's go to the next slide, please, because Travis Johnson is going to talk to us about boosting cyber resiliency. Go ahead, Travis.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And as Tom said, I'm here to talk to you about how an active archive can boost your organization's cybersecurity. And as Tom and Adam have already spoken to, it's no surprise to anyone out there that organizations' data volumes are growing at a very rapid pace. And where organizations used to be dealing with terabytes, they're now dealing with multiple petabytes. And of those that have an active archive today, the average business has over 8 petabytes of storage, with roughly 1/4 of this, or 2 petabytes, being in an active archive solution. And while this data growth creates several challenges, many of which are being touched on here today, one issue in particular that's growing in importance is data protection. And as data continues to become more critical to an organization's bottom line and profitability, it is growing in value. And unfortunately, this means that the organization's data also needs a higher level of protection. And this could be protection from human error, natural disasters, but especially the ever-growing threat of malicious actors. And the need for increased cyber resiliency is becoming apparent all across the globe. So it brings up the question, how will organizations make their growing data repositories more cyber resilient? Which I will talk to on the next slide. And one extremely effective way for an organization to increase their cyber resiliency is by implementing an active archive. Now, it should be said that any archive system acts as a last line of defense for data protection, but it still plays a very critical role. In fact, over 40% of organizations that have an active archive have stated that they saw an increase in their cyber resiliency simply by making use of an active archive. And these organizations are seeing this benefit for several reasons, but as an overarching concept, it enables the standard 3-2-1 best practice for protecting archives by allowing for 3 replicated copies of the data across 2 different media, with one being offsite or simply somewhere else. Along with this, it promotes the use of an air gap for inactive data, referring to a literal gap of air between the protected system and the protection system. And while there have been virtual air gaps developed, the physical air gap still plays a vital role in protecting archives. And whether the air-gapped media is magnetic tape or optical disc, the principle is still the same. The bigger that you can make the air gap, the better for protection purposes that it is. And lastly, it promotes immutability. If you'd like to make records immutable for only a set period of time, that can be enabled through software policies. And if you'd like to make them permanently immutable, whether it's for compliance or regulation, you can utilize a write-once media like optical disc, which changes at a physical level, making it unable to be altered again once written. Go to the next slide, please. Now I'll turn to looking at how active archives are being used today and their role in an organization's cybersecurity. As people have been experiencing an increase in the number of cyber attacks, over 3/4 of organizations have actually increased their usage of and reliance on an active archive system as a means of cybersecurity. And more than half of all organizations actually installed an active archive, with one of their use cases being cyber resiliency. And lastly, when making and justifying the decision to implement or increase the usage of an active archive, nearly half of all the organizations list cyber resiliency as a key decision factor. While data is empowering businesses to achieve record profits all around the world, it's becoming a challenge to keep their data secure. Implementing an active archive that follows the best practices for data protection allows for the use of an air gap, along with truly immutable media, helps you overcome this challenge. Now I will turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you very much, Travis. Let's go to the next slide, because Rich Gadomski and Sean Brume from Fujifilm and IBM, respectively, are going to talk to us about an important topic, sustainability in active archives. Go ahead, Rich and Sean.
Thank you, Tom. IT sustainability has really come into focus over the last few years. And part of that is the perpetual growth of archive data, but also the overall energy consumption of the IT industry. The reason archives play such a critical part in the sustainability aspect is 40 to 60% of data is in some sort of archive, with a lot of it being deep archivable. That's even when it is in a more active or warm environment. Much of that data is deep archive. And those deep archives, in order to enable a better sustainability, need to have footprints that start with lower embedded carbon. And CEOs rank sustainability as their greatest organizational challenge 51% of the time. And this is really a first time in history where security of infrastructure and data is not number one. Sustainability has surpassed it. And 86% of those companies have sustainability strategies, but only 35% are being acted upon. And really, archives represent an opportunity for reducing energy consumption of overall data storage. And energy consumption is one of the major drivers behind sustainability efforts today, especially in challenged regions. And properly managed data can reduce energy consumption by up to 68%. Let me turn it over to Rich and let him describe a little bit more about the sustainability.
Thank you very much, Sean. So this slide shows the energy advantage of tape in the usage phase. And I like to tell people you don't need tape for an active archive, but you definitely get the benefit of energy reduction compared to disk, as well as the TCO reduction, which you'll see soon from Sean. But what you're looking at in this chart is a study done by Brad Johns Consulting. This is based on a 10-year TCO of 10 petabytes at 35% annual growth. And what Brad found was that an all-tape solution consumes 87% less energy and produces 87% less CO2 than the equivalent amount of HDD disk solution. So after 10 years, the tape solution will have produced 383 tons of CO2 compared to over 3,000 tons from the disk solution. So significant reduction in energy and also CO2. In the next slide, we're going to do a deeper dive. So Brad then looked at the total life cycle, including the procurement phase, manufacturing, distribution, usage, and also disposal. And in the next slide, we'll see that the benefit of tape actually increases when you factor in the complete life cycle. So in this study, Brad again looked at 10 years, 100 petabytes, and found that tape reduces CO2 equivalents by 97% in an all-tape environment compared to 100% HDD. So comparing over 2,600 tons of CO2 equivalents to just under 80 tons for the tape solution. Now, in an active archive environment where we typically have a mix of HDD and tape, the significant savings are 58% in this case, a little over 1,100 tons of CO2 equivalents. So active archive incorporating HDD and tape, significant savings compared to an all disk solution. If the data has completely gone cold, it can stay on tape for an even greater savings, a 97% reduction in CO2 equivalents. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sean now to talk about TCO advantage.
Thank you, Rich. And TCO is often misunderstood. We often look at taking a TCA, acquiring hard disks or acquiring tape, and then we just stretch it over the time we think we're going to keep that infrastructure. But it's so much more. It includes your energy consumption, operational expenses. And just like we looked at with a carbon footprint, A 100 petabyte 10-year TCO study revealed that in an active data state, so your active archives, moving from a 100% HDD or 100% active environment and recognizing that probably 60% of that data can move to a lower tier, whether it's tape or even deeper storage, you're going to see a significant savings. And in this instance, utilizing the same compares, you're going to save around $9 million by moving 60% of the data to a lower tier in a warm or active archive environment. And if all that data were deep archive data, you could save up to 78% in the total cost of ownership over those 10 years and bring it down to about $3.8 million or almost $14 million savings. And that savings translates as well back over into the sustainability factor when you look at the two environments compared to each other. Let's go to the next slide. So in this instance, we use a very readily available compare of HDD of 10 petabytes, open compute, which allows anyone to go out and look at the infrastructure, be able to compare it. But in a head-to-head compare of 10 petabytes retained for 10 years, which most data that's regulatory or needs to be kept, not just because of regulatory, but maybe because it has value within data or AI, is going to be retained for a minimum of 10 years. And in this instance, as you see, comparing HDD to tape is around 80% less total CO2e contribution over that 10-year life. That results not only in saving the environment, but also saving dollars in offsets related to coming to a net zero effect. Let me hand it back over to Tom.
Thank you, Sean. Let's go to the last slide here. So we hope that you've been able to get some interesting information and learn a little bit more about active archiving. But if you have additional questions or you want to find out valuable information from the experts in active archives, please go to www.activearchive.com, and there'll be places, resources there you can find out more or get a chance to talk to somebody and learn more about active archives and how it could benefit you.
Hey, thank you very much, Tom, and everyone for participating today. Have a great afternoon.